I want to share with you a story about life, perseverance, and going outside your comfort zone. I've started this video several times now, and I keep stopping and starting. I want to share a story with you that is hard for me to share. Sometimes we all have things that make us go outside our comfort zones. And for me, I have been struggling with one for a few years now. And we've talked about it on our podcast, Adventures in Imperfect Living. In fact, we have gone into great detail and shared some very personal things and battles in our lives over the last few years. But in a nutshell, a few years ago, I was diagnosed with PTSD, which I never even thought was possible for someone unless you were a first responder or a soldier or something along those lines, or experienced some other type of really deep physical trauma. But for me, it was a particular trauma was a final straw that broke the camel's back. And it brought a lot of other traumas back to the forefront again and sent me so that I basically have become somewhat of a recluse over the last few years. And many people are always surprised. They see me doing talks and they hear me podcasting and they'll see me even in public. And I'm able to put on a facade of being outspoken and outgoing, but I'm very much an introvert. And that doesn't just mean I'm shy. I wouldn't say I'm necessarily shy. I just very much need a lot of time by myself and able to recharge and be what God needs me to be. So the problem is that the PTSD has had other negative side effects in my life, and it has somewhat paralyzed me from doing a lot of things that I used to be able to do with more ease. For example, I have developed a huge difficulty of being in large crowds, of being in situations where I don't have an escape route, where I might feel trapped and I can't get out of it. And again, it's really embarrassing for me to share these things, and there's a lot more detail that I could go into to explain how difficult this has been, but it's been a trial for our family over the last 4 years or so since I was diagnosed with PTSD, and it has been a long road of healing. And I am getting much better, as this story will tell you, because recently our parish decided to lead a pilgrimage to the March for Life in Washington, D.C. The idea of going and being among thousands of people in Washington, D.C., that was actually kind of easy for me to imagine. The difficult thing for me to imagine was being on a bus with 30 plus strangers who I didn't really know and not having an escape route. I just cannot tell you how constricting, how claustrophobic, and how terrifying that idea was for me. Because now if I get overwhelmed, I can go and hang out in my bedroom and be by myself. But that wasn't going to be the case. But I've been going through a lot of very positive work late in recent months to help me to overcome some of these difficulties and really to encounter these difficulties head on and let God bring some deep, lasting, real healing into my life. And so when this came up, as soon as I saw the first notice for it in our church's bulletin, something in the back of my head said, my wife is going to want to do this. And sure enough, she said, I really think I'd like to go for the March for Life. And just as a little context, for years, we did a radio show on Sirius XM's The Catholic Channel. And we regularly, every single year, would have remote guests on our show who were at the March for Life and give us updates. And we covered the pro-life movement in great detail. And just this was something that we always wanted to do and never had the opportunity. And so now here's the opportunity. My wife said she wanted to go, and I brought up the idea of maybe her taking our daughter along with her. She's about to turn 13. This would be a great way for her to really experience the pro-life movement. And then I said, I think that I might want to go as well. I didn't really like the idea of my wife and daughter going off on a trip like this without me. I felt like I needed to be there to support. And my wife immediately was like, are you sure? Are you sure you want to do this? I'm like, oh no, I totally don't want to do this. I don't want to go on this trip. I don't want to be on the bus. I don't want to be among all these people. I don't want to do this, but I feel like God is calling me to stretch myself and to do something uncomfortable. And he does that for all of us. Just because we may be stricken with illness, or we might be dealing with trauma, or we might have experienced a great loss, God tells us, Jesus tells us, pick up your cross and follow me. And my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And I can tell you, it doesn't always feel light and it doesn't always feel easy until we do pick up that cross and until we start to follow him, because it's when we follow him that he gives us grace to be able to do that heavy lifting alongside him. It's when he gives us the grace to be able to overcome things that we think that we can't overcome. He helps us to do it. And that's what I experienced over the last few days when I found us waking up at 3:30 in the morning, driving to our parish, getting on a bus, and beginning the drive to Washington, D.C. And along the way, as soon as I sat down, I was very, very thankful, and I said, thank you, God. I had a seat to myself. I'm a tall guy. I'm almost 6'5", 200 plus pounds, and I won't tell you what the plus is. And I really needed the leg room. And I was sitting there by myself, and it's just amazing the way that God puts the right people in your life at that right time. And there was someone on the bus who we have known for many years, and she said that she wanted to learn how to make rosaries. And so here was finally this opportunity. I was going to be able to teach her. We had plenty of time for me to sit down and walk her through making the rosaries. And so I had a bag of twine, and I had some crucifixes, and I had miraculous medals, and I had a little cigarette lighter to singe off the ends, my scissors, all the stuff I need to make rosaries. And so I pulled out this bag, and I'm teaching her, and sure enough, we're not even one knot into me teaching her how to make a rosary when these three other women behind me started perking up and saying, oh, are you making rosaries? Are you learning how to make rosaries? And so, of course, here I am, the founder and head of Rosary Army. I had to take advantage of this. I was like, yep, we are. Here's some twine. Follow along, and started showing them how to make the knots. And you go around your finger and you make the X, and showing the things I've said thousands of times, to people of how to make these things. And as the time went on, some of these women were getting frustrated and they were getting angry because the knots weren't coming out the right way, and they couldn't figure out how to do this knot, and they couldn't figure out how to get the twine going. And what I started to do to them is what I feel like God sometimes does to me, and I started to go silent. And I showed them the knots, and I walked them through some of the trouble spots, and I helped them to get where they needed to go. And then as they started to struggle a little bit, I put my headphones in my ears, and I just kind of blanked out, but I could still sort of hear what was going on behind me as they're making their rosaries. And why did I do this? Why did I let them struggle through it a little bit? Because it's sometimes in the struggle that we learn the greatest lessons. And as I was listening, trust me, I was super tempted to turn around and go, okay, let me help you. Let me help you do this, right? But as I was listening to them, they started to help each other. They started to struggle through, and then they would make these aha discoveries. All of a sudden, something would click, and they would get a knot just right. And I was just sitting there going, this is what always happens. And this is what I feel like God does to me all the time. Sometimes it feels like God goes silent. I can't hear him. And that's when the cross feels heavy, right? The burden does not feel light. And it's oftentimes in those moments where God's like, okay, I've told you what you need to be able to get through this difficult time. And I'm here. If you really need me, I'm here. I'm, just like I was in the seat ahead of them, I'm there, but I wasn't directly hands-on at that moment. And I feel like that's what God was doing for me after all these years of dealing with mental illness, quite honestly, and this PTSD. Is that he has taught me so many tools and so many ways of recovery in the last few years. And now here was this first major milestone that he was bringing me into, of being, trapped like a sardine in a can on this bus, heading towards an event that I've never experienced in person, with tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people. I cannot even explain the swarm of humanity that was there. And God gives us the grace we need in the moment that we need it. When we got to Washington, and those three women had finished their rosaries. And I said, "You are now a Rosary Army soldier." And they were so proud with their rosaries. And then they, of course, then wanted more twine, and they're making more rosaries, and they're very excited, and they're asking about the Rosary Army website, where can they get supplies of their own and all that kind of stuff, and I was directing them to that. But it was just watching them wrestle with that challenge of making the rosaries, while I was simultaneously, and they had no idea, I was simultaneously wrestling with the challenge of experiencing a healing that has been happening over time, and then sort of testing the waters. Has the healing stuck, I guess? And I won't say that I'm completely healed. That's not what this video is about. What I'm saying is that going to Washington, D.C. and going to the March for Life and stepping off of that bus and being in the midst of that swarm, it was a reminder that God never, ever leaves us alone. And when we persevere, and that's a grace from God, right? Perseverance is a grace from God. To persevere through our difficulties, God will always be there with you. And I felt the need to share this with you because many of you struggle to persevere in praying the rosary. You persevere in your faith. You persevere in your relationships. You have difficulties in all those areas. But God is saying, persevere. And I am there with you always. I will help you carry that cross. I will lighten the burden. Because the crosses without Christ are very heavy crosses. The burdens that we carry without Jesus are very heavy burdens. The yokes that life puts on us can feel very constricting without the freedom given to us by Jesus. So we recorded another podcast, by the way, that if you want to hear our journey at the March for Life, and I honestly feel like you'll be right in the middle of it. If you've ever attended a March for Life, you'll feel like listening to this podcast will make you feel like you're experiencing it again. And if you're like us and you never had a chance to attend a march before, listening to this podcast will make you feel like you're right in the middle of it. We included, by the way, I was able to capture the talks from Father Mike Schmitz. Kirk Cameron from Growing Pains was there, got some of his talk. Amazing talk from a wonderful young woman with Down syndrome, Katie Shaw. Oh, she was amazing. All these talks and a lot more are in this week's podcast, Adventures in Imperfect Living. You can listen to that over at our other website, gregandjennifer.com. You can subscribe to that podcast, of course, wherever you get podcasts. But that takes you into the middle of this journey with us. But persevere this week. If you are struggling in some way, then take that cross, ask Jesus to help you carry it. If you feel a heavy burden, ask Jesus to lighten up the load. If you are dealing with something for a very long time, whether it's difficulty to forgive someone, it's difficulty in living out your faith, difficulty with employment or a relationship, persevere. Ask for the grace of perseverance, and God will give you that grace to take that next step. Don't worry about the end of getting there. You know, we're not always going to get there right now. As I said, I've been on this multi-year journey that led me to getting on that bus. I could not have done this even a year ago. God takes us to the next step. We need to take that next step to persevere, to carry the burdens that we need to carry those crosses right along with him. Jesus will be there along the way. Thank you for listening to this week's News from Headquarters. And until next time, as always, make them, pray them, and give them away. God bless.